What is up, everyone? So today we are going to be tackling one of, fish keeping's probably worst nightmares, to be honest, and we have suffered a lot with them recently. What with the bad weather and the winter, we have been suffering with a fair few power cuts. And in this video I want to tackle everything that you need to do before, during, afterwards, because in all honesty, power cuts, well, they can be disastrous for an aquarium, and sometimes it looks like you've got over the power cut and it's the days after that actually cause the problems. So first of all, it's probably worth mentioning why power cuts can be so disastrous for aquariums, and I'm sure you understand, to be honest, but most of our aquariums rely heavily on electrical items. You know, you've got filters, you've got heaters, you've got air pumps, all keeping our aquariums happy and healthy and essentially alive. I suppose you've got lighting as well if you've got lots of demanding plants, but to be honest, lighting's not so critical. It's the other ones that are the problem. If they start going off, oxygen levels can start to drop, toxins can start to build up. It just spells disaster, and if you don't act quickly, or efficiently I suppose, quickly is not so much a problem, but definitely efficiently, it can be, well, a matter of life and death for your aquarium, to be honest. Now, one of the most immediate issues in a power cut is oxygen loss. As soon as those filters or your air pumps stop working, in heavily stocked tanks, the oxygen levels can drop rapidly. It's not so bad in aquariums with small amounts of fish and, you know, a lot of surface area, but certainly if you're looking at big cichlid tanks or fish with big chunky fish in, those oxygen levels are going to deplete rapidly. Now, if you are worried about this happening, one way you can combat this is by manually removing and adding water. Now, I'm not talking about doing a water change. You don't need to add new water necessarily to the aquarium, but just literally picking up water with a cup, pouring it back into the aquarium, and just doing that. Again, it does depend from tank to tank. In heavily stocked tanks, you might be doing it every 10-15 minutes. In lighter stocked aquariums, you might not need to worry at all. You just need to keep an eye on your fish, and you don't want them to get to the point where they are gasping at the surface. You want to keep that, well, you just don't want that to happen. If your house regularly suffers from power cuts, or you think it's going to be a longer outage, then a battery powered air pump might be the way to go, or it certainly would be your friend in this situation. Now, this is obviously going to take a little bit of planning, because if you don't suffer from power cuts, is there any need to have one at home on hand? You'll probably never use it. They are useful. I've transported fish before, miles and miles, with a battery-powered air pump in a car. But, to be honest, with my situation, with 20-odd aquariums in the house, one battery-powered air pump isn't going to do much. But certainly for you at home, if you've got 1 or 2 aquariums and you are worried about power outages, you can just get a battery-powered air pump, rig it up to an air stone so it looks something like what I've got going on behind me, and away you go. It can just keep your aquarium bubbling over for hours and hours on end. Always make sure you are keeping spare batteries though, because that would be the worst thing in a power cut, is getting it all up and running and then having no batteries. It's like Christmas Day with a toy. You just don't want to suffer that problem with no batteries. But like I say, with oxygen levels, it is going to be very much dependent on the aquarium. There are fish like your bettas and your gouramis that are going to honestly be able to breathe from the surface and probably won't be that bothered by having no filter or no air pump for several hours on end. Then you're going to have things like big cichlids or fast swimming fish like, well, actually the minnows behind me or my barb aquarium. They're probably going to struggle within a few hours, and yeah, oxygen levels are going to start dipping and they are going to start having an issue. So it is going to be each aquarium on its own. You are going to have to gauge your aquarium as it comes. The next thing to be thinking about when you suffer a power cut or a power outage is the temperature of your water. Now, certain fish won't be bothered. I've moved away from the minnow tank behind me because, in all honesty, there's no heater in there and they really wouldn't care, to be honest. As long as the house doesn't get freezing, like freezing, they'll be absolutely fine. I'm going to have problems before they have problems because there's probably not enough jumpers in this house to keep me warm. But fish like these beside me, so my Mac Master Eye pair, actually wouldn't take well to a sudden temperature change. And again, it is dependent on the fish you're keeping. But temperature swings and quick temperature swings are definitely the enemy. They are going to cause you some big problems and they might cause your fish a big amount of stress. So keeping the temperature stable is the key thing. Most of the time it doesn't matter if it drops a few degrees, as long as it's gentle, and then once the power comes back on it can come back up. but a big swing is going to be a problem. So what can you do to keep the temperature stable? Well, it is a tricky thing, to be honest with you. I have been known in the past to wrap my aquariums in blankets or duvets, or even those foil insulated sort of blankets they use at the end of a marathon. Not that I'm the person to be running marathons, but you get what I mean. Anything that's going to insulate your aquarium. Bubble wrap would probably be a good thing as well. Anything that will insulate the aquarium will help keep that heat inside. You don't necessarily need to do the top, but if you can, it would be good. But definitely the sides, you are going to suffer a lot of heat loss from the aquarium as your house cools down. Now, the other thing that you may read about online when suffering with a power cut and having the temperature drop is by putting hot water bottles around the aquarium, like resting them up against the glass, or even filling up bottles with warmer water and floating them on the top of the surface. Popping hot water into your aquarium or around your aquarium, even pouring it in, I've seen all these things being suggested on Facebook groups and stuff. It can cause more problems because then your temperature is sort of dropping a couple of degrees, then you're warming it up a couple of degrees, then it's dropping again. And that is probably more stressful for the fish, going through these cold and warm spikes in the course of what? Maybe an hour, maybe half an hour, 2 hours. So having that sort of yo-yo effect will not be good for them. It's much better to let them sort of gradually cool down and then gradually warm them up on the other side. It is obviously important that you don't get down into dangerous numbers, and every fish is going to be different. You are going to just have to look at the species in your tank, what temperatures they can sort of survive at, thrive at. You're just going to have to look it up and see where your danger level is. If you are getting to that danger level and your house is dropping below that danger level, then yeah, you're going to have to get warm water. But my house stayed at 17, 18 degrees, and the tanks didn't drop much below 20, 22. So it's not the end of the world. I was just letting them gradually slow down, and then once the power kicks back in, the heater kicks in, and they'll slowly warm up over the course of a few hours once that filter and that heater, that was the word. Once the filter and the heater kick back in and start circulating water, it warms back up gradually. A couple little things to add on to the temperature or the heating side of things is bigger aquariums are obviously going to take longer to drop in heat than smaller ones. So if you've got a mixture of aquariums like I do, the smaller ones are going to be the ones you probably need to focus on first when it comes to temperature. When you're trying to keep the heat in the aquarium, obviously everything you do when you're removing water, trying to keep the oxygen levels up and pouring that back in, that is going to be cooling down your tank a little bit each time. Opening the lid to pour the water in, going to be cooling down your aquarium. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. You've got to decide whether oxygen levels are more important or temperature is more important for your aquarium. This aquarium here, with the amount of fish that's in there, very small amounts to be honest, I think I'd be more worried about temperature than I would be filtration and oxygen. Whereas something like my big festive cichlid tank downstairs, I'll be honest, I probably wouldn't be worried too much about temperature, and I would be worried about the oxygen levels dropping in there just because they're chunkier fish. But keep an eye on your tank and just work out what is going to be more important for your fish at that time. As soon as you suffer with that power cut and your filter cuts out, your fish waste isn't really going to be processed. Yes, there's going to be bacteria in and around the aquarium. Yes, your plants are going to use it up a little bit, but without light, the plants aren't going to use up that much waste. They're not going to be growing, cold water. Anyway, waste can build up. Ammonias and nitrites, these are going to be the ones that you need to watch out for when the power goes out. So for short periods of time without power, it's probably not going to be the end of the world. They are probably going to deal with it absolutely fine, and it's going to be the days after, which we'll talk about in a minute, that will be the problem. It's when everything kicks back in and doesn't necessarily catch up with itself. But for a few hours, yeah, I wouldn't worry too much. I'd wrap them up, maybe do the oxygen thing a few times, pouring some water in. You should be good as gold. But for prolonged power outages, you may need to look at doing some water changes to keep those toxin levels low. So I wouldn't be going horrendously big. I'd be doing maybe 10 and 20% water changes. And again, you're just going to have to gauge it on how well stocked your aquarium is and how much waste is being built up. But I would think 10 to 20%, maybe every hour or two, just a little one, and trying your best to match the temperature of the aquarium to the water you're putting in. And you are going to need warm water for that, unfortunately, because there's no point in doing water changes if the water change is going to be freezing cold because you've got no heating. Now, with doing water changes during a power cut, you don't want the water to be freezing cold, because that's going to cause you a problem in another way. So I'll be honest, I had a power cut quite a few years ago now, probably 9-10 hours. I didn't do a water change once. I kept looking at the aquarium, kept peering in there because I'd wrapped it up with blankets, and the fish almost went into like a bit of a slow dormant state. It was so dark in there, it was getting colder and colder, and they almost went into like a rest mode, to be honest, and they weren't moving, they weren't swimming. Do not feed them during a power cut. That is the last thing you want to do, because you'll just be adding waste to the aquarium. But yeah, I just left them alone. But if you have access to some warm water and your power cut's going to go on a little bit of time, then you could obviously mix up some boiling water with some cool water, get it to a vaguely right temperature and slowly add it. Now, one thing to make sure if you are doing water changes during a power cut is to be using a dechlorinator and some sort of bacterial supplement. When I was doing mine, I was using Optimus and I was using Satis from NT Labs. This is a new bacterial supplement that's probably actually only being released as I'm releasing this video, actually saying that. And Optimus is an amazing new dechlorinator, and yeah, they're great things. But I was using these during my power cut, and these are my go-to dechlorinator and bacterial supplement now. And yeah, just make sure you're using them during the power cut if you're doing water changes, because the last thing you want is to be putting chlorine or chloramines or something nasty into your aquarium that's going to add to the problems of the power cut. So yeah, use these. I'm sure it goes without saying, but during a power cut, you are stressing out about a few different things. Probably your freezer, probably your fridge. Yeah, probably resetting the time on the oven, because that's always a tricky thing. But you don't need to add to that, and your fish don't need to add to that either. Keeping your fish stress levels low is going to ensure that you do the best for them during the power cut. Keeping the blanket on them and keeping them dark is going to help reduce stress levels. No loud noises near the aquarium, no banging, no messing about. This is all going to help to reduce the stress on your fish, because the more they're stressed, the more their immune system is going to dip, the more waste they're going to produce. It's just not going to go well. The other thing is, make sure you're not checking in on them too often. I know it's a hard thing, but constantly lifting up the blanket every 5 minutes and looking in there is going to be a worry. I normally set my timer, varies, but every half an hour, every hour, something along those lines. A quick check-in, no shining torches, just keep it dark, and they should be a little bit less stressed. Now, I have already mentioned, but reducing feeding during a power outage is key as well. I'd say no feeding whatsoever. Yes, okay, it feels mean, and yes, okay, you might check in on them and they all come up to the surface and they want to be fed, but refrain from doing it. Adding waste, adding food, anything like that to an aquarium without filtration, without oxygen, is just going to cause issues. I'll be honest, even when the power comes back on for a few days, I probably wouldn't feed them, because we're going to talk about that next. But most of the time, in my experience, the problems used to come for days afterwards, when you would get back into your normal routine of feeding, but the filter hadn't yet caught up with what had just happened to it. Now, firstly, it's checking your equipment. If everything has been off for hours and hours and hours, it may be worth making sure that the filter doesn't kick back in instantly, because inside that filter is going to be a lot of decaying matter, a lot of bacteria that's probably died off, and if the filter kicks in and kicks all that back into the aquarium, you may have a problem. If it's only been off for a short period of time, you'll probably get away with it. But you can always give your aquarium filter a quick rinse out in some old tank water, just give it a quick squeeze out to make sure there's not a big build-up of waste being chucked back into that aquarium when it all kicks back in. Not an aggressive clean, because you don't want to wash everything away, but a definite rinse through with old tank water would be good. And then it's just checking that your heater's back on, set to the right temperature. Maybe you need to reset your lighting timers so that the lighting's coming back on. Maybe check that your air pump's kicked back in. Just making sure all your electrical equipment is back on and working as efficiently as it can. At this point as well, you could add some bacterial booster into your filter, just to make sure that any waste levels that the fish are producing have got a bit of a helping hand in getting those bacteria levels back up in the aquarium filter. So next it would be testing the water. Now, again, you're just looking for the normal things, your ammonias, your nitrites, your nitrates, your pH, and just checking everything is where it needs to be. Hopefully you've been keeping a log of all of these values essentially up to this point, because then you can look back and see where your pH was. But if anything is untoward and a bit weird or a bit wrong, it's going to be a water change. But hopefully now you've got electricity, so you can get the temperature roughly to the same temperature as you want it to be, and you can do a nice water change for them and get some fresh water going in there. And then it's just regularly testing to make sure everything's kicking back into gear. Now, I did mention setting the lighting back onto the timers and things like that, but what you want to try and avoid is the lights to just all hammer back on straight away as soon as the power comes back on, because that is going to be very stressful for the fish. So it might be worth, in a power cut, to be fair, turning off your lights so that you can control when the lights come back on. It might be worth opening up a blind or a pair of curtains to let some natural light in and give them a bit of time to settle before turning the main aquarium lights on. Again, just reducing stress, not making anyone panic, not anyone sort of flying around the aquarium at 100 miles an hour and hitting something and damaging themselves. It's all about reducing the stress. And then over the coming days, you just need to keep an eye on your fish and your aquarium for any weird behaviour. Gasping, erratic swimming, fish flicking off of things. Because as soon as you get power back on, most people are like, oh, that's okay, everything's back on, we'll do a bit of feeding and we'll do this and do that. But your aquarium has just been through a very stressful event, and a lot of the bacteria may have disappeared and died off. So yeah, going back into a normal routine of big feeding and doing some frozen feeds or feeding algae wafers may not be the best thing to do. It will probably be best to leave them a few days without any food at all, and then slowly start increasing the food over a few days. Again, there's going to be so many variables in these situations. You just have to have the knowledge so that you are best equipped to deal with the situation. But I can guarantee you that most of the time when we used to suffer power outages in the aquarium shop, it used to be the days following where people had, started feeding again and started doing normal things, where the problems would come and the filter just couldn't catch up with itself. So gradually easing back into normal aquarium life is going to be the way forward. But most of the time, power outages or power cuts are unpredictable. They happen whenever they want to. You can't know when it's going to happen. So being ready for it and having all the stuff ready and raring to go is probably a good idea, especially if you suffer with them regularly. So hang on, I've written a list because I knew I wouldn't remember this off the top of my head. So battery operated air pump if you suffer with them for long periods of time and spare batteries to go with it. Aquarium thermometer, easily and readily to hand so that you can check the temperature and you can keep a close eye on. A lot of these things you've probably already got kicking around or maybe even in your aquarium, but it's just good to know where they are in this event. Insulating materials, blankets, towels, anything you're going to wrap around the aquarium and keep it warm with, good to know where they are. Water conditioner and bacterial booster, obviously you should have that anyway. Hand warmers, hot water bottles, something you're going to put warm water in if you're going to go down that route, ready and available. Water testing kit, you should have that somewhere nearby anyway. A manual siphon, that's always a good thing to have, because if you do have one of the plug-in ones, that won't be very good for you. But a manual siphon and maybe some buckets and jugs, again, should be part of your fish keeping kit anyway, but at least then you'll have them to hand ready. I think that's everything on my list. I might have missed something, but I think that's everything. So having no power in your aquarium doesn't have to be a disaster. You can come through it absolutely fine, and as long as you have a level head and you're ready to essentially tackle the power cut, then your fish will remain safe, healthy, happy, and yeah, absolutely fine. I don't normally do it, but obviously if this video has helped you, it helps to grow the channel, to like, comment, subscribe. You've all clicked off by now, unfortunately, but please go and hit a button. It helps me out massively. And yeah, let me know in the comments if there's any tips or tricks that you guys and girls know for power cuts. And let me know in the comments if there's another video of something like this that you'd like me to cover. I am working through them slowly. I'll see you in the next one.